Hi everybody, we are the Wildlife Wire, and we are back with our next episode of Wildlife Biologists Rank the Animals of Planet Zoo. We have a very special guest today, which we are very excited about, so we will do a round of introductions, but to start off, this is an animal that is extremely poorly recognized by the public. I would consider it the animal in the most dire need of a PR agency. But before we get into it, I do want to say a big thank you. Our channel's been growing a lot recently. One of our viewers put our Eurasia Pack reaction on the Planet Zoo forum, so I think a lot of people came from there. And from Skeleton Crew, we played a little bit of a part in their 1-year anniversary, which was the day before we recorded this. So we got some new followers from that, including Keenan Taylor, who I'm very excited about, who makes Tales of Chimere. Love his work. Very excited to see him watching our content. But to begin, my name is Dominic Noche. I received my bachelor's degree in wildlife biology from the University of Montana. I've worked on several projects, mostly with carnivorans and ungulates, and I'm currently working in New York on bobcats.
And I'm Justin Ruby. I've also graduated from the University of Montana studying wildlife biology. I've worked previously as a research technician and currently do wildlife education.
Hello, I am the Unnatural History Channel. Chances are you'll probably know me from my Monster Hunter videos and other projects such as Kong Skull Island. I have a undergrad in zoology and a postgrad in ecology, and I've done work across most of southern Africa.
Yeah, so we're very excited to have UHC on. This is our first ever collaboration video, hopefully to many more. And so because we kind of said after the platypus that we wanted to stop doing the wheel a bit, grow our channel, do some more videos on controversial species, we thought spotted hyena was a great one. I've spent a little bit of time around spotted hyenas when I was in southern Africa, but UHC has spent quite a lot as well. They're one of his favorite animals, so we invited him on for this episode, and we're happy to see that he's here. UHC we're big fans of his. Before we started our channel, he was really one of two wildlife channels that we could really recommend in good faith. Very, very educational, which is saying a lot because he does videos on Monster Hunter and King Kong, as he said, very fictitious settings, but there's so much good information there, great detail, so it does mean a lot to have him on here.
Oh, flatter me, it's a pleasure to be here.
Yes, pleasure's all ours as well. So,
Absolutely.
we get to start off with the spotted hyena. Justin, do you want to kind of walk us through the habitat that you've made here for these guys?
Yeah, so for the habitat, we've made like an open grasslands, kind of based on Serengeti. We have a mix of some kind of drier vegetation, and then some greener vegetation as we get closer to the watering hole. And in this habitat, we have a bunch of spotted hyenas, males, females, and babies as well.
Nice. Yeah, so spotted hyena, of course, this is another species that has a tautonymic scientific name, where it is Crocuta. I'm not actually sure what Crocuta means. UHC, do you know?
So I think it's an old myth, like if I remember correctly. It was believed when a village dog, I think, mated with a jackal or a wild dog, it would produce a crocuta, and then that was a man-eating beast that would sort of croon to its victims as it ate them. And so that was, I think, what some people believed hyenas were.
Okay.
And so yeah, when the early colonials went down, that's the name they gave to the spotted hyena.
Interesting. So that shows right off the bat, this is an animal that has had tons of negative stereotypes and negative perceptions, and it's really something that I know a lot of people from our generation really associate it with the Lion King, but it's very much something a lot older than that. I know, for example, Aristotle hated hyenas, but I would imagine he was more so coming in contact with the striped hyena than the spotted hyena, at least at first. So
And Hemingway as well, also quite famously disliked hyenas, and a lot of the early sort of hoorah pseudo-conservationist sport hunters would often say like, oh, the majesty of a male lion or a bull elephant is one thing I could never hunt, but would happily blow away a clan of hyenas or wild dogs. So I think anything that didn't look that aesthetically pleasing was often quite hated by, those early explorers / colonials.
And it's interesting too, because if you look at actually the paleontological and prehistoric history of the spotted hyena, this was an animal that was very, very widespread. It used to occupy most of Eurasia as well, and it only went extinct there at the end of the Pleistocene. And those hyenas were even bigger. They were a paleo subspecies that some people know as the cave hyena. Very similar to spotted hyenas. They were still interbreeding with African spotted hyenas, but they were larger. They had slightly shorter legs, a bit more robust, and that's because they were taking even bigger game like steppe bison and woolly rhino and things like that. But they get snubbed in favor of things like cave bears and wolves and the cave lion, which to me it's just Panthera spelaea. It's not really a lion. It doesn't act like a lion, but these guys were the dominant predator, and we have a lot of really good isotope signatures that show that these guys were eating just about everything. They really were excluding Panthera spelaea as well as gray wolves from accessing a lot of different prey. It was mostly cervids, so things as small as roe deer to as big as megaloceros, the giant deer. Hyenas weren't really hunting those, but wolves were very reliant on that sort of prey, and Panthera spelaea was extremely reliant on hunting reindeer. So these guys had a very dominating presence, and maybe it's possible that our fear and repulsion of hyenas goes as far back as the Pleistocene, because they were such a dominant predatory force, and they needed caves just like early humans did, and were very widespread. So I imagine things were very intense between early humans and these hyenas that were very widespread.
Yeah, it's one thing I've often sort of thought about as well. Is it may be sort of be hardwired, for want of a better word, in humans to some level to dislike hyenas, and you have to put some effort in to overcome that. But with cave hyenas as well, I always thought it was quite interesting, like you mentioned with the isotopes, is that they showed that suddenly some clans had quite a preference for Ice Age horses as well, and especially the foals. And then you look at like Suzanne Cooper's papers from Botswana and Savuti, and how they preferentially hunt the zebra foals there, and how it's almost like the exact same scene that plays out in Africa today, just on the steppes of Europe.
Right,
just
exactly.
10 or so thousand years ago, which I thought was, it's really quite cool.
Yeah, and I know in Hwangi as well, there's a couple of zebra specialist clans too. So I guess an important thing about spotted hyenas is they're not scavengers. They are very much active predators. They have a lot of coursing adaptations. They're very good at running prey down, and the prey goes and they just follow, and they just keep going and keep going. And yeah, they're not as fast, but they have such good stamina that they can eventually catch up and tire prey out to kill it. But unlike things like wolves and painted dogs and dholes, they actually do a lot of solo hunting, which I think even people that are very familiar with hyenas in a positive light don't necessarily know.
Yeah, it's the fission fusion sociality, you call it, where they can forage alone, they can forage in a group, and it's one of the things that, if you look at other predators as well, seems to come from being a more dominant species. There's it's lions and spotted hyenas that chiefly seem to do it, whereas smaller carnivores like wolves and painted dogs seem to they're much more cohesive in their social systems. Often because there's larger predators that they're vulnerable against, whereas with a spotted hyena, it's only really lions that they have to contend with. So
right.
It's sort of a luxury given to the top dogs, as it were.
Right, and I think another good segue right here is to talk about, I think people, mainly because of the way that media presents itself, even documentaries in this case, that lions are very much dominant over spotted hyenas in all and every situation. But spotted hyenas can actually hold their own quite well against lions. That's, yes, they're smaller and they have to rely on numbers, but that's why they live in larger clans, is so that they can better defend themselves against lions. And even big males, there's situations where if there's enough clan members, they can still defend a kill that they've made from a male lion, or if there's lions that made a kill and the male's guarding it, they can even steal from those lions, because they will do both. They will steal kills from other carnivores, they will hunt their own food, and if they come across something that's dead and unattended, they'll eat it as well. They're very opportunistic in that regard.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Like, again, from Suzanne Cooper's paper, the one thing you often see people quote from that is the sort of 4-to-1 ratio of 4 spotted hyenas to a lioness. But then that seems to vary depending on the location. There's like other studies have found, like I think in East Africa, it's often more. Because competition's less intense, because that's such a prey-rich area, that it's typically less effort to go and get your own kill rather than fight lions for it. And then in places like Mill's study in Kalahari, it's much more, the hyenas, competition's generally more intense. Hyenas are much less willing to give up a kill because the next one could be, 50 kilometers away. So It's a much more valuable resource that results in more intense competition.
I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think Mill's paper says that there were like cases where it was just a pair of spotted hyenas like per lioness ratio, right?
So I don't think they ever displaced lions with such a small ratio, but there's somewhere the ratio, it is much smaller than you'd expect, and I don't think there's ever been formal records of it, but there's a few cases where, it's been videoed that a single hyena has displaced a lioness, which, even if there's, probably something, going on with that lioness that made her more wary, but that's still quite a feat in and of itself.
Right. And I think part of that, too, comes from the fact that spotted hyenas are a lot bigger than people think. There's a lot of people that think that they're like coyote size. Like, no. These guys are, like, easily bigger than the biggest wolves. It's not even close.
Yeah, it's one thing a lot of guests say when they first see an adult hyena is that it's so much bigger than they think. And if you're ever on foot with them, or if they're just right by the vehicle, they are like the size of a mastiff, or standing quite a bit taller at the shoulder.
Yeah.
And the thought of the cave hyenas being about 30% bigger, that is a huge carnivore. That's an insanely powerful animal. And
even then, too, well, I remember before I went to Botswana, we had Dr. Kay Holekamp, who will come up later. She led and founded the Mara Hyena Project, which is a very important project to understanding spotted hyenas and their conservation. She was a guest speaker, and it was right before I left, and I went to the graduate get-together after the presentation, and all the grad students are putting me in front of her, and there's like, oh, this is Dominic, he's heading to Botswana in a couple of months. And the first words out of her mouth were, they have big hyenas. And I was like, oh, okay, and we kept chatting, and then eventually I got there, and I think it was our second night out in the bush, and we just finished doing the dishes, and you just hear that whoop, and it's loud. And so
magical sound.
Yeah, I mean it's an eerie sound. Capstick has a great quote about it in Death in the Long Grass, but we hear that, and my instructor's like, all right, everybody move this way, and me and a couple other students understood, oh, she's gesturing to the fire, let's stay close to the fire. But most of the students just ran and dove into their tents. And like after they dove into their tents, we're looking around confused, and we're by the fire, and you start seeing them come in, and I would say there was at least 15 of them, and that was when I realized just how big they got. And like some of the leading members, and they were just checking us out. It's a new campsite. What's going on here? This is our territory. Nothing aggressive, just curiosity. But they were big. They were really big. And even then, nights afterwards where I'd see them, I'd see a hyena running, dashing around, and my first thought was a black bear. And I was like, I'm in Africa. There's no black bears here. What am I looking at? And then you had to be like, oh, it's a it's a spotted hyena. But those shoulders and that neck, it's very bear-like in that regard.
Yeah, no, they're very hugely proportioned animals, especially in the front. And
Yeah.
what a Pleistocene experience as well. Your first sighting of spotted hyenas being them illuminated by firelight coming into your camp. That's an eons old experience.
Right. But I guess that's a good segue into the design of this model. So I don't know about you guys, but I hate this model. It's really bad. You know what it's supposed to be, but they very clearly use like the wolf.
You can credit them for that.
They use the wolf rig for this in the model. Like, it's got really skinny long legs. It's got a very long tail. There's no slope back. You can tell it's supposed to be a spotted hyena mostly because of the head, but even then, like, the muzzle seems really long to me. There's just like no power to this thing at all.
The muzzle as well, like that and the mask, almost give it a very aardwolf-like face. But the back especially, they look very hunchbacked, but in the middle, which makes them look very weird when they walk as well.
Yeah. It is just...
almost a bit pig-like in a way.
Like, I am one that says that modern spotted hyenas don't look ugly. This looks ugly. And it's because you took an animal and kind of like did a half-ass job on it, but I'm not a fan of this model at all.
And I think it's another. We've kind of talked about it before with Planet Zoo, where sometimes they kind of tend to like cartoonify their animals a little bit, and I think we're seeing a little bit of that here as well, because it's like a little too. Like soft and rounded, if that makes sense. At least in my opinion,
there's like sharp. It's like sharp angled points. I don't know if that's because they're using the dog model, and dogs have that more narrow snout and the pointy ears, and they're just like trying to like fix that as much as they can off the dog model. But it's very noticeable.
I can see that. Yeah.
The tail bothers me a lot too. Spotted hyenas do not have tails nearly that long. But yeah,
when they run as well, they haven't quite captured the sort of the rocking horse aspect.
No, and I think that comes from the lack of the shoulders as well, because they've got that shoulders and that slope back, and it really generates all this power in the front legs, and they don't really have that. But I guess to move on, so the hyenas have a history, honestly, not even just with Westerners, but even within Africa, where they're not as glamorized as big cats and some of the other large animals that they live alongside. And that was the case for a very long time, and it wasn't until the 1970s, because of a man named Hans Krook. And Hans Krook was sent to do a predator study in the Serengeti National Park. And it was more broadly looking at predators in general, but it ended up that he had a lot of focus on spotted hyenas when he was there. And at the time, people thought this was a dumb bully, a scavenger, no real value. It's just a very immoral animal. And Hans Krook really revolutionized our perception of the spotted hyena, and it's very amazing to see because it's rare for just one study to completely change our understanding of an animal like that. And it's a general trend that we've had with predators where we've seen, they have dynamic social groups and complex families, and they're capable of these really amazing behaviors. But it was a very big deal for the spotted hyena, and unfortunately a lot of those negative perceptions still linger today. So there's still a lot of work that needs to be done, but Hans Krook is absolutely an icon for really pushing the spotted hyena. And you definitely still had, I think, some other non-professional sentiments that way as well, because I know Death in the Long Grass was published a few years later, but Capstick had been in Africa for a very long time, and he stands up for the spotted hyena as well as the painted dog in that book, and talks about how, if you think this is a dirty scavenger, then you've never seen it go after a sable antelope and have to dodge all those horns. And you say they're dirty, but they're immaculately clean, and they groom themselves all the time. So it seemed like people that really spent a lot of time around hyenas, they knew that those stereotypes were bogus.
Yeah, it's the best way, I think, to change most people's minds about hyenas, certainly when you've got guests and you're taking them out on safari, is to take them off into a hyena den. And then when they can see the sort of family dynamics and they get to meet the cubs, which, you know, most people would admit are pretty cute, that's often the sort of the changing point for a lot of people. The more time you spend with them and seeing the cute babies is the most efficient conversion to hyena, to get people to like them rather than hate them.
Yeah.
And with Crook as well, I think his main question that he had was, when he first went to the Serengeti, he saw so many of them, and he was thinking, how can an ecosystem support so many of these animals when they're scavengers? And then it was through following them that he realised, they weren't scavengers at all. And then I think it was 2 or 3 months into his project, someone asked if they wanted him to double down on the lions, and he said, no, the hyenas are far too interesting for that. So obviously they got George Schaller in instead for the lions.
Yeah.
George
Schaller is very famous
as you
for
say,
his lion
there
study.
probably hasn't been. Yeah, no, definitely. But as you say, I think there's not been another study quite like that one that's just flipped the script so completely on a single species.
Yeah, it's usually it takes multiple studies. Like wolves, it was like, Isle Royale was a big start for that, but you still needed the follow-up in Yellowstone and a couple other things elsewhere. It wasn't immediate like it was with the spotted hyena.
Still plenty myths that persist today, sadly. I think with hyenas as well, it's almost they're sort of like the old guard of myths, like they're hermaphrodites, they're scavengers, this, that, and everything else. And then this is the sort of the new neo-wave of myths that we're only really sort of busting now, like the whole the matriarchy thing about all females are higher than all males, and the siblicide aspects, which a lot of people still believe. And the matriarchy one's always a bit of a pain to tell to guests, because you have to be so careful with how you sort of pop a myth that makes people like an animal more. You've got to really tread carefully around that, and to do it sensitively, so people don't lose that love that they might have initially gained from that falsehood.
Yeah, it is like it is interesting with the social structure, because even though they're a carnivoran and because they're a coursing predator, people say that they look a lot like dogs. They're not close to dogs at all, actually. They are closer to cats, but even closer still are things like mongooses and euplerids. So that's like the Madagascar carnivorans, like the Fusa or the Falanook. They're closely related to those types of carnivore families. And a lot of the dog-like traits are from what we call convergent evolution. So they were running down prey and killing it in a similar manner to dogs were. So they evolved to look like that completely independently from dogs. It doesn't show that they have a close common ancestry with dogs, at least by carnivoran standards. They evolved those traits independently. So I think that that's an important distinction to make, and for people that's really hard for them to understand, like why was there not all that shared ancestry? You have to remember that when we talk about dog-like carnivores and cat-like carnivores, when that split actually happened, all carnivores like pretty much looked like weasels. And it's easy to see when you have the aspect of weasels are on the dog half and mongooses are on the cat half, despite the fact that they look almost exactly the same. So when you have that divergence and they all look like that, then it's a lot easier to see, both sides could go with a dog-like route, but be not that closely related in all sense of the term. Yeah,
it's always a bit funny that people seem to insist that all carnivores have to be either a dog or a cat. Like, when you tell someone that they are, they're actually closer related to cats, and they go, oh, so they are cats then? It's like, well, no, they're hyenas, is what they are.
Yeah, hyenas are in their own family. Hyenae is its own family. Felidae is another family. They're not the same. They're just closer than Canidae.
Yeah, that peculiar insistence, everything is either a cat or a dog.
Yeah, I know. Especially with Feliformia, because if you look at the families that are in Feliformia, cats are like the one that looks super weird and distant from everything else.
Yeah, no, they're very derived, and the amount of things that are called like ex-cats as well, like fisher cats or civet cats, just makes that even harder as well.
You are talking to somebody that works a lot with fishers and has been working a lot with fishers since he was a teenager, and I refuse to acknowledge the name fisher cat because I hate it that much. So I know that very well. But yeah, I think, even as a carnivoran, though, their society is very primate-like. It's very similar to macaques and baboons and things like that. And so when Crook first looked at hyenas, I'm pretty sure it was Crook that said, oh, it's a matriarchal society. And this is one of the things that, yes, Crook revolutionized our understanding of hyenas, but that doesn't mean that everything is completely solid. There's stuff in there that's outdated. And one of those big things is that it's not a matriarchal society. It's a matrilineal society. So what that means is that the sons will inherit their mother's rank. So if the matriarch has a son, and that son grows up and stays within the clan, he's going to outrank all of the females aside from his mother and maybe some of his sisters. And so that's a very high-ranking male. The reason that we tend to see males being towards the bottom of clans is because they will disperse. And when you disperse into a new clan, then you're at the bottom. And they do that because it provides better breeding opportunities. They're not with as many closely related individuals. That's a general trend that we see in male mammals, that the males will disperse much farther than the females to find those breeding opportunities, because it's more important for a male to mate with as many females as he can in a lot of situations, whereas with females, they mate with one male and then they have to raise those babies.
Yeah, on a similar note as well with the rank thing, I think it's one of the many things about spotted hyenas that's so interesting is that you're hard-pressed to find an animal where rank means as much to it as it does to a spotted hyena. Like, almost every aspect of their life is shaped pretty much by who their parents were, or rather who their mother was. Even the males that do leave, because they're typically fitter and healthier and in better condition, if they had a high-ranking mother, they tend to have better success when they're dispersing, because they were born with that silver spoon in their mouth. So even the ones that leave will still be benefiting for pretty much their whole lives. And the ones that stay, they are high-ranking, so long as their mother's, near the top. And then all the snowballing benefits that has, it's just another thing that is just so interesting about them.
Yeah. And, we've even seen some rare cases. I know Ngorongoro Hyena Project has documented it a couple of times, but they've documented actually males leading clans. So there are actually situations...
patriarchy, as you could say.
Yeah. So it is you can't really call it a matriarchy if there's a male in charge. So that happens from time to time. And then they also released a recent study. I don't know if you saw it at UHC, but they were looking at dispersal in brothers and in cousins that were very close in age. And very often they would disperse to the same clan and they would work together and keep each other safe. And in some cases, they were bullying females that outranked them to get access to resources, which is really, really interesting in my opinion.
Which is almost another thing, that's also fascinating about them, the intelligence as well. And how that sort of... I think those two things are combined, the group sizes, the amount of clanmates they have to remember, and then, how that sort of will almost likely demand either a bigger brain size or more neurons or something like that.
Yeah, especially due to the fact that a lot of times they're hunting solo. And, obviously they'll come together if it's, something really big that they're chasing, like an adult zebra, or, the rare occasions that they'll go after something like buffalo or young rhinos and hippos, or a rhino that's stuck in the mud. That sometimes happens. But, you have these moments where you're out foraging by yourself, and then you all congregate at kills, and then maybe there's a time when lions attack, and you all have to rally together, because that seems to be one of the main drivers, or at least that's a prime hypothesis for why spotted hyenas have their clan system even in the first place, because it's not something that we see in the smaller brown and striped hyena. Their social structure is a bit more similar to canids.
Yes, the stripes and browns, Mills also did a lot of stuff on them. It's also roughly matrilineal in that it's often a mother and then her sort of helpers that are past offspring. So yeah, more like, a fox or something. But yeah, definitely not the same sort of big clans that spotted hyenas do. And most territorial struggles are sort of singular individuals rather than group defense. And then the males are typically nomadic and sort of float between clans, trying to mate with the females, which is something quite interesting about brown hyenas as well.
Yeah. And the brown and striped hyenas, they scavenge a lot more, and we will have a striped hyena episode at some point. Striped hyena is in the game, it's in the grasslands pack. But, striped hyena was probably the hyena that Westerners were encountering first, because they are found in the Middle East and in Asia, and I think there's some records that they at least got to like the Aegean coast in Turkey, so not far from Europe, in all honesty. And those are animals, they still hunt, but they still scavenge a lot more, and the amount that they hunt is relative to how intact is the carnivore guild and how often are there carcasses that they can access. But if that's not available, they're going to hunt a lot, whereas with spotted hyena, they're very much more actively predating on things, and they do have to worry still about attacks from lions. Very young hyenas do also have to worry about leopards. That is a concern. I think there's definitely some leopard fanboys out there, though, that think that leopards can kill any hyena, when it's a very rare behavior, and it's really reserved for those giant toms that are getting close to like 100 kilos, 200 pounds, that sort of big jack tom is the one. And even then, it's it's going to be those smaller, younger hyenas. It's not going to be a healthy adult.
Yeah, I remember in Ted Bailey's study, one of his big male leopards, on one or two occasions it ate young spotted hyenas. But there was that study by Panthera that was quite an interesting look at a kleptoparasitism on leopards, and they found most of it is hyenas, and the different ways a leopard would defend itself, and how the treeing behaviour that leopards are so famous for is effectively put in place by hyenas. Like in areas where you don't have many of them, or you don't have any, almost all the kills are just fed upon the ground. And yeah, it's something that they actually need the prompt to do rather than it being an innate behaviour, which is pretty interesting.
Yeah, we mentioned that in our Amur leopard video, because Amur leopards, whenever you see photos of them, at least, they're always on the ground. Like, they're never in the trees, and I'm sure there's instances where they would get chased by a tiger, and climbing up a tree, for a little bit is a good move. But as you know, UHC, because you've sent me photos of it, when it comes to lions and tigers, they can still climb. And so if they're really motivated to go for a leopard kill that's hoisted into a tree, they'll do it, and they'll steal it. So sometimes it's better off if a lion or a tiger comes for a leopard kill, it's better for the leopard to just run.
Yeah, no, it's effectively the conclusion of the paper is, if it's a bigger cat, the leopard just runs. But I remember once there was one female leopard, and it was in the rutting season for impala, so luckily she had a lot of good hunting opportunities, but she made 4 kills in 1 week, and she only kept one of them. One was stolen by a hyena, one was stolen by either a male lion or a spotted hyena, And then one, she did tree it to keep it safe from a hyena, and then 3 of our young male lions all piled into the tree and stole it instead. So it's not fun being the smaller cat.
No, not at all. But yeah, I mean, it's good because I think there was a point when people really underestimated spotted hyenas and were saying that leopards and cheetahs were dominant over them, and I think more people recognize that that's not true. They're way more resilient against lions than people think, as we've said. But I think another big thing that is more of a modern myth is kind of ties into their reproduction. And as we all know, there is the infamous pseudopenis, which UHC, you said before that some people initially said that they were hermaphrodites. And I'm not honestly a big fan of it being called a pseudopenis because it is just straight up female genitalia, like in core structure. It just happens to be shaped like male genitalia. And I don't know. It just seems...
Yeah, no, I'd say that's fair.
Like, it is like you
it's
got
just
all
a
the
bit
parts
of an
there.
over-exaggeration to call it that.
Yeah, I'm not a fan
the
of
parts
it.
are just shaped weirdly, yeah.
Yeah. Which I don't think... We still don't really know why hyenas have evolved this, but I think one of the main hypotheses is that it's an anti-rape device. As we've said, females aren't as dominant as people think, so yeah, maybe having an anti-rape device would be helpful. And I know that fusas, when the females are really young, they have a very similar structure to what spotted hyenas have, but as they mature, they grow out of it. So maybe it is a basal ancestral trait, but then again, I don't think the other Malagasy carnivorans have it. So it is a very weird structure. It makes birth an absolute pain because the babies have to come through that, and it's actually one way that you can tell older female spotted hyenas apart from younger ones is they'll actually have scars on the fringes because that canal is so small and it's hard to get a baby hyena through there.
Yeah, no, and then when they're born as well, the struggle doesn't really stop there. It's like there's the myth as well of infanticide being hugely prevalent, but the sort of newer understanding is that it's more facultative rather than obligate infanticide, where it's not it's not the one sibling literally mauling its other sibling to death. It's one will sort of dominate the nipples of the mother, and it won't allow its sibling to feed. It'll monopolize all the milk, and then so its sibling starves rather than it's killed directly by its sibling. And as well, it was also done by Holekamp on the different causes of mortality on young hyenas, and for the middle-ranking ones especially, when they brought their cubs to the communal den, the biggest threat to them, I think, was actually being killed by another member of that clan, and a lot of the time it was often a related hyena, like maybe their aunt or grandmother or something, and she'd kill them to sort of, obviously to reduce pressure on her own cubs, so there's more resources for them, which is something, not many people really knew they did until that paper was published. There's also the finding that very low-ranking mothers would sometimes abandon one of their cubs because they couldn't support twins. And that does sound bad, but it's something that a lot of other carnivores will do as well. But you have to specify before anyone uses it as another point to try and dunk on hyenas. But yeah, it's another reason. It's another example of how they may be hugely social animals, but there's a lot going on in the clans themselves that is a struggle. And again, it's another bonus of being high ranking, and just how hard the low rankers actually have it.
Yeah, and I think like another thing too is I know like George Schaller has a very famous passage about mother lions, not necessarily doing infanticide, but if a cub's dead, they will cannibalize it to recoup on the investment. It's something that Jonathan Scott observed several times when filming Big Cat Diary and just in general. So it is just something that happens. I know rodents are very famous for eating their offspring if times are tough to try and recoup on that investment because they breed so quickly. So it is just very much a general thing that happens. But with spotted hyenas, you mentioned how it's a lot of like facultative. siblicide. And a big part of that is because it's so hard to get out of that birth canal that usually spotted hyenas are born in pairs. So there's a pair of cubs, and the cub that pops out first has a huge advantage to getting access to mother's milk and things like that because it takes so long for the cub to actually be birthed into the world.
Yeah, when you're a spotted hyena, it's, the problems begin the second you're born, really.
Yeah. But, they still, yes, they have issues with higher ranking clan members. They also have issues with lions. I know male lions in particular, if they find a hyena den, they will just come in and they will kill everything. Because hyenas compete with lions. They're in that similar size range, so it's a way for lions to reduce competition in the future from spotted hyenas. If they have a chance to kill very young, vulnerable cubs, those cubs aren't going to grow up. And so lions can suppress spotted hyena populations, but at the same time, if you've got a good clan with good defense, like they can hold their own against lions better than people think.
Do these have vocalizations as well, or is that just something from someone else's laptop?
Sorry, that's my dog.
I don't think we can hear the game audio. But I will say that the vocalizations are right.
Oh, there we go. Can you guys hear that?
No. I think because it's a screen share. But I can confirm that they actually use hyena sounds, even though the appearance isn't great.
Okay, good.
The sounds are great.
Yeah, no, they're so distinctive with how they sound. Like, the first time you do hear them, not just the whoop and the laughing as well, but like the mothers will often sort of low like cattle to get their cubs to come out the den to them. And yeah, there's so many vocalizations you wouldn't expect from a hyena, and they're so loud as well, especially when they're eating. Like the shrieks and sort of giggles they make. Like you're almost covering your ears if they're right by the vehicle eating something. It is quite crazy.
Yeah, and I guess another thing too, speaking of vocalizations, is the trademark laugh of the hyena is not actually them laughing. Humans love to put like vocalizations and facial expressions like to say, oh, it's the same as what we do, but the laugh is actually a very submissive vocalization.
Yeah, typically it's more sort of showing anxiety or something similar than any form of humor, if hyenas have a sense of humor.
So yeah, it is really interesting in that regard. And I guess while we've got the cub up, I feel like at this size the cubs would start getting their spots, but when they're really young, they're actually like a pure like black, dark brown. They look very, very different to this kind of like, whereas this is a bit more of like a mini-me juvenile, just being a miniature version of its parent. But they do have a stage where they're very dark and look very different to their parents.
Yeah, it does cutify them a bit, although again guests love that. But a very small black cub, it really does look like a teddy bear that's on all fours. And so yeah, people often get their hearts melted by them. And then there's small ones that are often very curious, and they'll come up and like bite the vehicle and put their feet up on the door and stuff. So yeah, it's a very good way to gain them some popularity.
And another thing too is that the parents will actually bring back different objects that they find in the environment as like toys for them, and it also helps with just like tooth and jaw development, because it actually, even though hyenas are famous for their ability to crush bone, it actually takes them a while to get the jaws and teeth fully developed to be able to do things like that. So I think it's 2-3 years to get that fully developed.
Yeah, I believe it's 36 months for sort of full adult skull formation. And when you think about how long that is for, an animal that's average lifespan is about 15 years or so, that's a long development period. to actually get to sort of fully functioning adult capacity, as it were.
Yeah, that's about a fifth of your lifespan. So, that's a good chunk where you're relying on other people to be strong. But, like, once they get that, I mean, they can... It's really impressive because they'll crack something as big as a giraffe's thigh bone. And, bone marrow is really nutritious. There's a lot of calcium in there, which hyenas in general have very calcium-rich milk because of how much bones that they eat. And another thing that's really interesting is this actually benefits a lot of other animals. So there was a study in the 80s, I think, by Endangered Wildlife Trust, and they found that there were certain vulture chicks that did better in areas with spotted hyenas. And it was because when the hyenas crushed up the bones, there were these small bone fragments that the vultures could bring back to their chicks. And it gave the chicks very vital calcium supplements. So by, breaking down these carcasses, hyenas are doing actually a lot of very important ecosystem services that benefit a whole host of other animals, as well as even people.
Yeah, I think with the vultures as well, there's someone in Namibia, I can't remember their name, but they're looking into that as well, sort of carnivore guild structure and densities versus vultures and their success. But yeah, I think their findings so far are effectively agreeing with that study, in that sort of a more intact carnivore guild with hyenas is generally better for the vultures, even if the hyenas can still, monopolize a few of the kills. But tortoises as well are another thing, because obviously they need a lot of calcium for their shells. You'll often see them, if they find hyena scat, they will absolutely dig in with relish, eating it for the sweet calcium value, which to them is very important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's interesting. And then another thing, actually, more so looking at the human side of ecosystem services provided by hyenas, is that they'll eat a lot of these carcasses, and if there's not that scavenging presence, these carcasses will sit and rot, and they'll just be a hotspot for all of this deadly bacteria that can mutate and turn into some pretty rough disease outbreaks and things like that. But if you have hyenas coming in and cleaning all that stuff up, it's very beneficial to people. And you're seeing a lot of urban studies on hyenas accessing human refuse in places like Ethiopia and a couple of those major cities where the hyenas are very comfortable being close to people, and they're feeding off of those sites. And there's some places like in Harar where it's kind of incredible how much coexistence and tolerance those local people have for a predator that big. It's very different to for example, where we are in the United States, where you have a lot of landowners that get upset the moment a wolf or a cougar even sets foot on their property. And, UHC being in, jolly old England, where you've already destroyed everything, so...
And even then, if we have, a fox or a badger or something that's in someone's garden, it's often, who do I ring to get this thing shot? And then in, like you say, in Harar, and I think in Malawi as well, there's an urban population of spotted hyenas. And it's pretty wild when you think about it, that you say that out loud, an urban population of a large carnivore is really quite a feat in and of itself for any large carnivore to achieve. Yeah, it's amazing how tolerant humans can be.
Right. Yeah, I think that's the thing that's more impressive to me is the human tolerance side, because you see that with leopards and cougars. You'll see these big stories about leopards in Mumbai and P22, the cougar that was living in Los Angeles. But really,
R.I.P.
Yeah, I know. I'm very sad. I didn't want him to go out that way. But those are individual cases, and it shows that they are capable of that. But if people aren't willing to accept the animals being there, they're not going to be there. And that persecution can instantly end any potential for something like that. So that is something important to take into account. It's a big thing with spotted hyenas too, and I think part of this comes from the fact that they receive less attention than big cats, and I would even say less attention than painted dogs, where we think they're doing... people think that spotted hyenas are in a better place than they currently are at. Yes, they're they're listed as least concerned, but honestly, I have a strong feeling that the next species assessment that the IUCN does for the spotted hyena, they're going to get uplisted to near threatened.
Yeah, almost certainly, because there's the one in, I think it was 2017 that they did with leopards, and everyone had the same assumption. You know, our leopards are fine. There's that saying, like, if you do a population count of leopards, double it, that's how many you actually have, and things like that, you know, where their very famous generalist nature meant that there was a lot of assumption on that behalf, that they were just doing better than they were. And then, yeah, when that study came out, it found out it was the complete opposite. And, yeah, with something like a spotted hyena, it's almost certainly going to be the same case, where we realise we've just destroyed a lot more of their range than we first thought. And that generalist behaviour just meant people coasted on that.
Yeah. I mean, I will say they are definitely, when it comes to persecution for livestock depredation, for example, they definitely are more resilient than lions in the sense that, let's say, for example, like the Maasai, you know, if they try to go out and they want to chase and spear the predator that's gone after their cattle, hyenas, because they're coursers, they're such good endurance runners, they can actually get out of there, whereas a lion, for example, is going to get tired and hide in a bush, and they're going to be able to surround it and spear it. But more often than not, we're starting to see a lot of poisons being used, very, very bad poisons in general, and that just kills everything. It kills lions, it kills hyenas, it kills leopards, it kills vultures. It's, you know, and we saw a lot of that stuff being used in North America when they were trying to wipe out wolves, and it was just so detrimental to anything that would feed on a carcass. It was really, really bad, and you're seeing a lot of the same stuff starting to happen in Africa.
Yeah, it's like, does this game have birds? Because I think a vulture episode would be quite illuminating. Because it's like you said with the ecosystem services provided by hyenas. Like, especially in India, vultures did a very similar job. And then they had diclofenac, which is effectively, you know, the vulture annihilator drug. And now they have the thing that they still call the Indian vulture crisis. And they spend, I think it's $1 billion every year on the rabies epidemic and other diseases, just was, yeah, the importance that scavengers provide in helping clean up an ecosystem. And the poisoning and the threat that is to vultures.
Yeah, I think we just get it out now. Unfortunately, there's no vulture in this game. There's no, like, free-flying birds at all. Like, the bird roster is very much limited to ratites, penguins, and then you have, like, a couple of flying birds that just don't have flying animation. So we've got, like, the red-crowned crane from Japan. We're going to be getting the mute swan. But yeah, the bird roster is pretty lacking, which you see in a lot of frustrations from the community whenever a new DLC is announced.
Do they have a secretary bird or ground hornbill? Or?
They don't have secretary bird, and I want secretary bird. I think, in all honesty, if we don't get a secretary bird, we might just cover it in Zoo Tycoon 2 because it's in that game.
There's one I did play when I was a kid.
Yeah. Zoo Tycoon 2 is... I like Zoo Tycoon 2 better, I'll be honest. I'm sure we're going to get a bunch of angry comments. I think Zoo Tycoon 2 is a better game. It's more fun, it's more casual friendly. I think that the campaigns were really nice scenarios, whereas with Planet Zoo, there's a lot of stuff that's more complicated and a slog to play, in all honesty. I like Zoo Tycoon 2 more as a game. But Zoo Tycoon 2 didn't have the spotted hyena.
I had the I had the super expansion pack where you had, like, the ocean and the dinosaurs as well.
Yeah. Yeah,
you could make your tank and put, like, 50 blue whales in it.
Yeah, it's a fun time. I do miss just being able to pick up and place animals. Like, with this game, it's like you have to, like, make the enclosure, and then you have to hire staff, and then be like, put this animal in the enclosure from the animal market, and then they run over with this box that's way too small for any of the animals, and then they throw the box in the air. It's really dumb. I wish that, you know, like, Jurassic World Evolution has, like, the cool, like, hatchery animations where they, like, come out of the building. It would have been so cool if we had animations with, like, the animal being, like, released from a crate, or, you know, being released from one of those, like, big trucks that you would, like, load on with, like, a trailer. That could have been something really interesting, but no.
Yeah, that would have been really cool.
If you delete the fences, will the carnivores eat people, or?
I don't think so. I think people just run away. Like,
Yeah, I think so. Like, and
Animation
I don't think
that's
they'll.
sorely
like
lacking in this game,
like
yeah.
the whole zoo just gets closed
Yeah, exactly.
off. Like, it doesn't. Yeah. They don't let you have fun in this game, UHC. Like, there's no predator
Oh,
attacking
1 out of
prey
10.
animations.
1
There's
out
no
of
predator
10.
attacking people animations.
Was always the highlight of, like Jurassic Park Operation Genesis.
Yeah.
Save your file, delete all offences, let everyone know.
Well,
Delete the
and-
evacuation path.
Yeah. Well, and the funny thing too is that I think even in Zoo Tycoon and Zoo Tycoon 2, only male guests could get attacked by animals, not the female guests. So there was a little bit of sexism there, where only men could get attacked by
call
a
it
wild
chivalry.
animal. Hey, chivalry is mostly
It's
about
like the
fighting.
Titanic all over again, yeah. Yeah, that's very true.
But yeah, so 'cause I remember like throwing like female guests in the enclosure and nothing would happen, and I was like, why is this? And then I had to look it up online, and they're like, oh yeah, only the men can get brutally mauled by a lion or a bear. So
You're going to get cancelled for that this early into your YouTube career. H-Bomber guy is already coming for you.
yeah, I would always instead put the guests in the enclosures because I liked it to be like a bit more controlled instead of like the chaos because I wanted to like see everything that happened. But yeah, that's like an interesting little quirk of Zoo Tycoon and Zoo Tycoon 2. But we can get out of this this stun lock. But yeah, I know like for example, going back to the poisoning in Kafue National Park in Zambia, Panthera and Zambian Carnivore Program, they put satellite tags on vultures. And it was a way for them to find poison carcasses faster and get them off the landscape so that predators weren't eating them. And they're actually starting to see an increase in lion and leopard populations in those areas thanks to this proactive program where they're using the vultures kind of as scouts for these poison carcasses, which is really, really cool.
That was really interesting, yeah. I think as well, Kafue, one of its problems was like it's sort of the medium/large prey base was a bit undermined as well. Like I think they had that paper on lions not too long ago, and it found that sort of most of the buffalo that they relied on have since been greatly diminished in number, and so the lions are taking more smaller antelope, and in some cases, some prides are even taking hippo because they're sort of their preferred prey range is almost gone in the park.
Yeah, so a good friend of the channel, Anna Kussler, who is one of the employees at Zambia Carnivore Program, also doing her PhD on the cheetahs in Kafue National Park, she was talking to me about this, and she was explaining that, yeah, that medium to large prey base is very much gone from bushmeat poaching, and so not only are the lions hunting hippos sometimes, but they're also very much going after things like impala and puku, which are antelopes that you more so associate with cheetah and painted dog. And so the cheetahs and the painted dogs, they're going after things like steenbuck and greasebuck and diker, these much smaller antelopes that still provide a good meal and that they can sustain themselves off of. But it just goes to show that the presence of a larger predator, even if a smaller predator can kill larger prey, sometimes it's more advantageous to take that smaller prey because it's safer, it's easier, it attracts less attention, you're less likely to get it stolen, and being fed is more important than being a badass and killing, something much bigger than yourself.
No, yes.
So that's something to always
cheetahs
take into
especially,
consideration.
their preferred prey range is sort of less than what you'd expect for carnivore their size, but it's just that it's easier for them to take something small that they can eat quickly rather than waste tons of energy wrestling something big down that may well get stolen.
And I think, tying into the prey issues in Kafue, one of the big issues, and we brought it up with our Amur leopard video, it's going to come up again and again and again, is bushmeat poaching and the use of wire snares. So poachers will set these snares. It's rather indiscriminate. There are actually very selective ways that you can use snares and cable restraints, but that's just not how they're being used in these settings because people just care about getting that big meal. And so they're very much targeting the larger antelopes because it's got more meat on it. And so we're seeing huge reductions in prey populations across not just Africa, but even in large parts of Asia. And for the most part, predators aren't being targeted by these snares. What's happening is they're being caught as bycatch. So you're using the same trails and the same pathways that the herbivores are using, and they happen to get caught. And so I know, for example, in Lua Plain National Park, which is also in Zambia, they are seeing a lot of hyenas that have snare injuries. And it's actually causing them to put their research on hold a lot of the time and go and dart these hyenas and remove the snares and treat the snare wounds so that we don't lose hyenas. And I think that that's a very admirable thing, and I think it's an important part of wildlife science to understand, is that you can do studies looking at behavior and ecology and all these other things, but none of that matters if the animal disappears. And so we're in a situation that's very dire right now, that everything that we do for science and ecology has to tie into conservation efforts, because we're losing these animals really fast. And spotted hyenas in particular, yes, people see them as very common. They're very generalist, but they breed really slowly. They only have a pair of cubs most of the time. They take a lot of time investing into raising those cubs. And so when a spotted hyena population gets hit hard, it takes them a very long time to recover. Spotted hyenas are very close to going extinct, I know, in parts of West and Central Africa. They're listed as vulnerable in Namibia, which is the same as lions and leopards. So yeah, they're not doing as well as people think, for sure. But it's important to address these issues like carcass poisoning and wire snares and other forms of conflict, so that we can have good hyena populations again, and work with local communities to promote coexistence and have them see the benefit of not just having hyenas on the landscape, but living in places close to hyenas, because space is becoming such an issue for a lot of wild landscapes.
Yeah, it's worth noting, so for all the sort of myths and legends in various African cultures there are, quite a lot of places, even if they have human-wildlife conflict, are generally more tolerant of both hyenas and large predators than a lot of people initially realise, and that most of them sort of have they're either fine with them being there, or often a sense of national pride that they may be there. So for all the negativity that does seem to come from Africa itself, it's the reputation hyenas have is often not as bad as some may fear in that regard.
Yeah, and I think another thing too is it's hard, as people from very Western countries, I've noticed this a lot when Justin and I, because we did our undergrads in Montana, a lot of very good, strong conservation work is very much driven by the indigenous communities, the Native Americans, and they have a much different tolerance, respect idea for a lot of different species compared to the more colonial settler people that now make up a good portion of people in the United States. And I'm sure the Europe situation is kind of different, but I know, for example, there's a lot of parts in Eastern Europe where they had very high respect for predators, and that's why Eastern Europe's been a bit more of a stronghold and better for recovery than parts of Western and Central Europe where the predators were gone.
Yeah, no, sort of East versus West, and especially a lot of very developed Western Europe is, not so great for a lot of the predators. And yeah, like I said, in the UK, it's just, I don't think we're ever going to get large predators back, which is sad to admit, but the cultural shift that's occurred, I don't think, was for a lot of people, a lynx may as well be a tiger. They don't understand how little threat it poses. It is a big cat, and therefore that is something that in their minds lives exclusively off humans.
Right, and the other thing too is that the UK is it's in a situation that I kind of compare to Japan and Indonesia, where at least when it comes to larger animals, it hasn't been an island for very long. So it has a lot of the same, it's supposed to have a lot of the same faunal guild as the mainland. But now that it's an island, nothing can get back there. So when you remove stuff, it's like, well, you have to reintroduce it because it's not going to be able to walk there on its own.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think we're one of the most biodiverse, we're one of the most, no, the least biodiverse countries there is. One, because of that, but also the just, like, intensive farming and things like that have just sort of absolutely bullied the ecosystem into submission.
Yeah.
Which is quite bleak. There's no real way around it.
Yeah, and like another thing too, you know, just bringing it back to spotted hyenas and stuff, and like when we talk about livestock depredation and, you know, we say that, yeah, these communities are more tolerant of predators, they also have way more to cost from these predators. These are people that are,
so.
They're much more financially dependent on their livestock, they're in much worse financial situations, yet they're much more tolerant. And I think that that's an amazing thing to understand because, you know, that connection and that deepness of having this associated history and essentially co-evolving with this animal overrides that financial and well-being desire sometimes, in the sense that, yeah, there's still conflict and they will still, you know, there still have been populations decimated from human conflict, but if you work and collaborate and improve betterment of life for a lot of these local people, they want those animals to still be there, and, you know, even if there's sometimes really close proximity to them. I know the Ruaha Carnivore Project, Lion Landscapes with Amy Dickman, they do a lot of that. They have this really cool camera trapping program where the communities will essentially compete against one another, where whichever community has the most biodiversity living right next to it will get funds for like schools and healthcare and other things like that. And the community themselves are the ones doing the camera trapping, so they are directly associating having strong biodiversity and large predators on their landscape correlates with us getting these community and financial benefits.
Yeah, no, it's a very novel way of doing things. And yeah, it's like, just to say on the cost thing as well, like I think there was a recent study that was looking into the costs of sort of different, like the financial burden that large carnivores place on different countries. And in Africa it was like a single cow depredation was like half of their savings effectively, which is... And then these people are still so tolerant of them, which is something you really can't praise enough.
Right. And, you know, it's very different to Europe and United States where it's like,
sadly so, yeah.
Like, you just don't have the animal here and we don't want it, despite the fact that we make way more money than these people, or we have other businesses that we're not super reliant on livestock. So, it's a tough situation, but I always look to those types of people that can raise livestock and live close to large predators like that with an insane amount of admiration, because it's not an easy thing to do, but I mean they really excel at it, and I wish they got more recognition for it.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. Well, it's just sort of a thing that's sort of changing now is like they call it the decolonization of science, just in involving the people you're doing the country of the research in and the local communities and that much more in the science, rather than, you know, in the old-fashioned way where they were viewed as an obstacle, if anything.
Right. Yeah. I value traditional ecological knowledge a lot. I think there's a lot of things that you see there where it's like they had this stuff figured out that we didn't have figured out until a couple decades ago, you know, from the scientific community. And, you know, sure, not everything's right, but, you know, there's still a lot of stuff, and it's always worth acknowledging that and collaborating with those people, because, you know, they have been sharing the landscapes with those animals for a very long time. So, is there anything that we haven't covered that anybody would like to add before we take this to the viewer?
I think I've said most things that I think are prescient about hyenas. I think we've covered most of them.
Yeah.
There might be something really obvious we've missed, and then we'll say.
Oh, actually,
I think we've got most of them.
Yeah, I think one thing is, and I want you to correct me if I'm wrong on this, but I'm pretty sure, like, with the bone-crushing bite that we talk about with hyenas and spotted hyenas, people have said, like, oh, it's the most powerful bite of any, like, carnivorous mammal, but I don't think that's true, right? Like, in terms of absolute strength, lion and tiger are still more. It's just that because spotted hyenas are better adapted for durophagy, that they're able to exert those forces more often on, like, harder surfaces and things like that without breaking their teeth.
Yes, no, that is true. Like, you look at the bite force studies, and typically, the giant carnivores, like lion, tiger, and bears, are typically higher in absolute terms, and there's some animals that are still higher in relative terms as well. But because hyenas have their teeth that are adapted to crush bone, and a skull that's very well adapted to withstand those stresses, that's what allows them to eat bone quite so efficiently.
Yeah, I think that was another misconception that I think some people have about hyenas. So.
Yeah, one of the many.
Yeah, that's not a bad one though. That's just like it's a little technicality, I mean, because the thing that I love about it is I had been talking to pangolin scientists like for a while from South Africa, and the pangolin scientists always love to brag that a lion can't bite through a pangolin's scales. And I'll always ask them, I'll say, well, what about a hyena? Because a hyena's better built for it. And they'll always ignore the question. They just don't want to answer it. And then I asked Kay Holekamp when I saw her, and she's like, oh yeah, no, they can. Like, I've seen them, like, tear through metal. Like, they can easily crush a pangolin's scales. And then I think, was it Mala? There was some Instagram post from a safari camp where it was this hyena sitting there crunching on a bunch of pangolin scales. So it's like, yeah, hyenas can crush through a pangolin's defenses.
I think it might have been the Skakusa golf course, because they somehow just seem to always see insane stuff there. But they did have a video of three hyenas, chewing on a pangolin, but I think it was like the round surface when it was curled up meant they were really struggling to do much to it. So I think while it's rolled up, it's fine. But yeah, like in terms of a pure sort of stress test, as it were, they can definitely go through those scales.
Interesting. Yeah, I didn't know about that part, but there's just like this piece of pangolin scales that this hyena's just got in its mouth, crunching it up. So I was like, oh yeah, they could bite through it, no problem.
I think they've been recorded to eat them as well. I think it was Henschel's predation study, he recorded pangolin. But I think that would be the most depressing sighting ever because of how rare it is to see one.
Oh yeah.
But to see something predating one, that would be incredibly crushing.
Well, you've seen a pangolin in the wild, right?
I've seen 3. I've been very, very lucky.
Wow. Yeah, that's crazy. Wow.
Yeah, for reference, like I've never seen an aardwolf or a brown hyena or quite a few of the other rarities, but pangolin I've been lucky to get 3 of.
Yeah,
and I cherish every one of them.
Yeah, one of my instructors when I was in Botswana, he was from the Baye tribe, grew up in Sankoyo village. When I was there, he had seen one aardwolf in his life. And after we got evacuated out from the pandemic, in that next 1 year span of time, he saw 3 more at different points.
It is funny, it seems to happen like that. You see something incredibly rare, and then you will inexplicably seem to get more of them at the same time.
Yeah.
Maybe it's just the same one just doing laps.
For sure. But yeah, it's all very interesting. Pangolins are great, spotted hyenas are great, but yeah, Justin, I guess if we want to take this to the Zoopedia, we can just look to see. I don't think it's going to have any interspecies enrichment because it's a large predator, but we can still talk about some of the animals in the game that are at least prey or competitors that have been added in.
There we are.
All right. Yep. Listed as least concern. Hyenidae as its own family. That's right. They're in their own family. They're not cats. They're not dogs. Yeah, so there's nothing in here. I'm trying to think. I mean, there's... Yeah,
well, I think the hyenas would benefit. It's everything else that would suffer.
Yeah, that's true. Well, it wouldn't benefit from West African lion, but it would probably benefit from everything else.
No, or maybe like an elephant. But
yeah. But yeah, I mean,
they they'd consider a very rich reward.
Yeah, I mean, they overlap with African
have you seen
bush
that insane
elephant.
video as well, where the boar somehow gets into the hyena enclosure at that zoo in Germany, and I think they ate it, but that was really quite surprising.
Wow.
Yeah, like a big wild boar got in, and the sort of big hyena just grabbed it and sort of was restraining it by its head, which was, for an animal that's never hunted in its life and its parents didn't either, it's been a captive for that whole time, was pretty impressive.
Yeah. I mean, it shows that there is some hunting instinct there. The bigger thing that you worry about with releasing captive carnivores is them getting comfortable with people.
Yeah. But on that note, it's sort of interesting that hyenas have so little of that done on them, like reintroduction stuff. But most sort of private reserves aren't interested in having them, or they're just they're not considered to be a priority species. And while some places have reintroduced them, the literature, that's what I consider one of the biggest black spots in the hyenas sort of scientific literature, is we know so little about reintroducing them versus so many other carnivores.
Yeah. And I imagine it's not easy with the slow reproductive rates either to build a new population from scratch.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I think despite the fact they're so successful in a lot of ways, one thing they don't do especially well is disperse into new areas, because it's much more they swap between existing clans rather than forming new ones. And so dispersal seems almost like, a bit of their Achilles heel in a way.
Yeah. But yeah, so in terms of animals that they do overlap with in the game, you've got, African bush elephant, both the black rhino and the southern white rhino. We've got the plains zebra, a ton of different antelopes, sable antelope, hemsbuck, springbuck, Thompson's gazelle, blue and black wildebeest, Nile lechwe. There's probably a bunch of others that I'm missing. Reticulated giraffe. Carnivore-wise, you've got the West African lion. You've got the cheetah, the painted dog. Probably some of the smaller ones, like meerkat. You got things like aardvark. Western chimpanzee, actually, they do overlap a little bit with, even though spotted hyenas are very endangered in West Africa, they are still in Neo-Kolokoba National Park, which also is the northernmost extent of Western chimpanzee range. So spotted hyenas and chimpanzees actually do overlap. We've never recorded any predation interactions between the two, but I wouldn't be surprised if they've managed it.
That would be interesting to see, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, they've killed baboons, so, it's not like they can't kill something that hides in a tree.
Yeah, definitely.
But, yeah, I think, ostrich is in the game. So, yeah, I mean, as everybody knows, people criticize Planet Zoo because they say it has too much Africa stuff. I think there's still stuff from Africa that's missing that I would like to see. But yeah, I mean, for something as ubiquitous as spotted hyena that lives in pretty much all of Africa, or at least historically lived in all of Africa, aside from the Sahara, the Atlas Mountains, North African coast, and the Congo interior, it's going to overlap with a lot of stuff.
Yes,
all right.
Good.
So I pulled the spotted hyena out from the list. UHC, do you want to start with this?
What's our ranking qualifications? Is it purely like how the model looks, or
models, maybe a little bit with the animations as well, and just kind of does it feel like the animal, as well as just general accuracy?
Oof. So the colors are good. You can tell it is a spotted hyena, so it's not a complete wipeout. But at the same time, it would be hard to justify putting it higher than C tier, I think, with the issues the model does have.
Yeah, I don't like this. I think it's pretty lazy to just slap a hyena on a dog model, and it perpetuates that stereotype that hyenas are dogs when they're not. It just leads to a lot of general issues that we've addressed already, like the muzzle length and the legs, and just like no slope back, no, like a super long tail. My personal vote for this is going to be D tier. I don't think it's bad enough for us to create an F tier, especially since we don't have anything really low anyway.
I think I'd be fine with D tier.
Yeah, that's my personal vote. I don't think it's the worst animal in the game. The worst animal in the game, in my opinion, is the Bactrian camel, and I will viciously attack it whenever we do the camel episode.
It's like its saving grace is you can tell it's a spotted hyena, which would probably be, like I said, the only thing I think could argue to keep it out of D tier.
Yeah.
But yeah, overall it is. Yeah, it's not a great model.
Yeah, like what it's supposed to be, and the vocalizations are good. Those are like the two redeeming qualities about it. But what about you, Justin?
Yeah, I'd have to agree. I think I'd put it in the D tier as well. Just because, like you guys were saying, you can tell what it is, but it's not great. Like, even the animations, they're kind of wonky. Like, when it lays down, it looks, not quite right.
I think as well, you can tell what it is shouldn't really be a point of praise.
Exactly.
That should be the bare minimum.
That's like the minimum standard. But I mean, I say that because I have seen zoo games where you're like, this is supposed to be a spotted hyena. Like, I mean, even like Zoo Tycoon 2's striped hyena is god awful, and it's like the same thing. They used like the dog model, but it's like you can barely even recognize that it's supposed to be a hyena. Whereas like, yeah, sure, this is like, it's not good, but it's like if you asked me what animal it was, I would still say spotted hyena. It's just not a good one.
True. Yeah.
If you guys want to say D tier, I'll agree with it.
Yeah, so D tier is all around. So as I said in our platypus video, we're not going to be spinning the wheel for a little bit. I guess we can let in on a little bit of secret. The next video is probably going to be either giant panda, or we're going to do a twofer with the koala and the brown-throated sloth, because the sloth is technically an exhibit animal, so we can't make like a giant habitat for it. And it gives us a chance to talk about convergent evolution. So those two are what we're planning on next. We haven't decided which order that will be, but hopefully you guys are going to be looking forward to seeing that next. Definitely, if you haven't watched any of UHC stuff, definitely check it out. I can give some great personal recommendations. That I really like his ecosystem services and Monster Hunter video. That's probably my favorite, as well as a lot of the Spec Evo shorts, like why super competition doesn't work, the hyper aggressive herbivore video, and the horns, what's the function of horns video. Those are some great ones. And if you're not a Monster Hunter fan, some of those aren't super Monster Hunter heavy, but even the Monster Hunter ones, I mean, there's a lot of good ecological information in there. You've just got to look. So definitely go check out his channel, and we're very happy to have him on here, and we definitely love to have him for some more episodes if he's willing.
No, I'd love to be back at some point.
Yeah. So, with that said, we are the Wildlife Wire and UHC signing off.
See you next time.
So long.